Well, it didn't take long. Josh Frydenberg, I've got to tell you, I've known a long time and he's very bright. And yet, one of the changes that's been ushered in Canberra is this new emphasis on this global warming nonsense. Well, of course, they don't call it global warming anymore, do they? Because they know the globe hasn't warmed for 20 years. So it's called climate change. And Josh Frydenberg is the new Minister for Energy. And there he was saying, oh, well, renewable energy is important. Really? Well, it might be. But what's it mean? Last year I spoke to Angus Taylor, the brilliant new MP for the seat of Hume, who wasn't good enough, the Rhodes Scholar, to get a Guernsey amongst the 41 handed out last Sunday. Not good enough to get past the 25-year-old no-hope and no-nothing whippersnapper Wyatt Roy. Angus Taylor. He must feel, how he feels, I've got no idea. But I had him on here towards the end of last year, and I asked him what, as a farmer, he would expect to be paid if a Qatari wind shark wanted to put some turbines on his farm. This was last September I spoke to Angus. And I said, look, say 70 wind turbines, and you're the farmer. Angus said, well, a farmer could expect to get about $10,000 a turbine. So that's $700,000 paid by the Qatari wind turbine company. And then I said to Angus Taylor, well, now what about me? I'm the Qatari wind turbine shark. What would I get courtesy of the taxpayer, Australian taxpayer? And Angus Taylor's answer, not mine, he's full bottle on this stuff. He said the Qatari wind turbine shark, you ready for it, could expect to get from Australian taxpayers about $400,000 a year per turbine. $28 million a year. Yours, taxpayer. No wonder they're in favour of renewable energy targets. The gravy train is anything but uncoupled. You can either have a manufacturing industry or a renewable energy industry. You can't have both, because solar power and wind power are many multiples dearer than coal-fired power, and manufacturing cannot compete if it has to source its energy from renewable energy. These are phenomenal amounts of money. And remember, this is all about carbon dioxide. 0.038% of all the air, say 0.04, is carbon dioxide. And of all of that, humans produce 3% of the 0.04. And of all of that, Australia produce 1%. So 1/10 millionth of CO2 in the air is produced by Australians. So what do we have to deal with that? A renewable energy target that will cost us $22 billion within 3 years. Direct action even by the Abbott government. And Tony Abbott was doing well to juggle all this, has already cost us $660 million. The Gillard government promised $3 billion a year for poor countries, $3 billion of your money, in recognition of the loss and damage they will suffer as a result of greenhouse gas emissions generated by rich countries. China was classified as a poor country. Our dough, $3 billion a year. Tony Abbott wanted to dismantle a lot of this stuff. Is that why he's gone? More of that in a minute. China, India and Russia couldn't care less about all this nonsense. And global temperatures haven't risen in 20 years. What dumb outfit demonises coal-fired power on the basis of some hoax about global warming and embraces expensive power which forces consumers to pay more and forces manufacturing out of business? And they go, jobs, jobs, jobs. They're being lost everywhere. I can tell you, 2013, BlueScope Steel in Victoria lost 170, Boral 790. These are all manufacturers. Penrice Soda in South Australia, 60. Pentair, a company that made steel pipes in Sydney for 60 years, 160 jobs. Amcor, 300. Goodman Field has shut down factories, 600 jobs. Caltex gets rid of the Kurnell refinery, 330 jobs. It goes on and on and on. On and on and on. Well, Tony Abbott's been sacked. Many of you have written to me to remind me of comments made by Lord Monckton in October last year. Listen to this.
When Sir David King, the scientifically illiterate chemist, who is for some reason William Hague's climate change ambassador for the United Kingdom, going round very quietly all the nations of the world, trying to persuade them that come Paris they must all vote yes to the treaty, because otherwise we're going to get 4 Celsius of warming over the next 100 years and the world will end and the sea level will rise and it will all be doom and gloom. He was asked by the Environmentalist Committee of the House of Commons in May of this year whether all the nations of the world were now in principle ready to sign their people's rights away in such a treaty. And he said, oh yes, but there are two standouts. One is Canada. But don't worry about Canada, he said. They've got an election in the spring of 2015, and we and the UN will make sure that the present government is removed. He was quite blunt about it. And the other holdout was Australia. And Australia he can't do anything about because Tony Abbott is in office until after the December 2015 conference. So that means you all, first of all, need to guard Tony Abbott's back, because the Turnbull faction, in conjunction with the UN, will be doing their absolute level best to remove your elected Prime Minister from office before the end of his term, and in particular before December 2015, so that they can get 100% wall-to-wall Marxist agreement. They do not want any standouts. And the most likely standout at the moment is Australia. God bless it. So look after him.
Lord Monckton is on the line from Edinburgh. Lord Monckton, good morning.
Good morning, Alan. I must say, I wish I hadn't got that one right.
He's gone, eh? You'll be regarded as an alarmist, but global warming stopped 20 years ago, so we now call it climate change.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, the whole story is exactly as you say, absurdly overblown. They've gone way too far with this. They're using it as an excuse to push an agenda which actually has nothing to do with the climate, nothing to do with the environment, and everything to do with establishing this old fascist and communist idea of a global dictatorship centered on the UN, using the climate purely as an excuse. Indeed, in the 2009 draft of the Copenhagen Treaty, they actually called it a government that they were setting up. And they said the government was going to have three powers. One, of course, was taxation. They were going to have the right of taxing people in countries who hadn't even elected them, because this government wasn't going to be elected. They were going to have the powers of regulation, directly overruling the elected parliaments in those countries that are lucky enough to have them, and they were going to have powers of enforcement, and the code word for that in UN treaty speak is facilitation, and it means the right to enforce their will by force if necessary. That was actually in the Copenhagen Treaty draft. I got a copy of it before the conference and publicised it.
And none of us,
about 5 million people on YouTube saw it, and that one failed. They didn't stop. They just carried on quietly in secret. They've already established 1,000 international bureaucracies as the sinews of this new global government, and now they want the final seal of approval from every nation on earth in Paris. And at the moment, I'm afraid to say they're going to get it, because exactly as I had feared last year when I spoke in Australia, and I said the same thing on your own TV program. Yeah. The danger was that the Turnbull faction, in league with the UN, and with the huge financial interests, such as the Qataris, who are making billions out of the taxpayer, the poor taxpayer, who is overpaying by double and even triple now for his electricity because of these wretched wind farms, and the businesses likewise, as you've just mentioned. This is a scandal, because what the political parties are doing, people like Turnbull, is that they're using these massive subsidies to wind farms as a backdoor way of funding their political parties. The deal is that if you get the permission to build one of these things, you're going to be getting, for one wind farm, you're going to be getting, as the operator, as the Qataris or whoever, you're going to be getting billions in subsidy. I did the sums for a wind farm in Britain recently, which we managed to stop in the end because the figures were so absurd. And the subsidy that one wind farm would have got off the coast of Dorset, called the Navitas Bay Wind Farm, which is now not going to happen, would have been $8.5 billion over 20 years.
Well, of course, the new Prime Minister...
This scam has got to be stopped.
The new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has said over and over again emphatically that global warming is a reality. At the high... I mentioned last time, because we'll be regarded as being alarmist and all the rest of it, but at the height of his powers as Hitler's Minister for Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels said this: "It would not be impossible to prove, with sufficient repetition and a psychological understanding of the people concerned, that a square is in fact a circle. They are mere words, and words can be moulded until they clothe ideas and disguise. So basically we're at the point, aren't we, where the square has become a circle.
That's very well put. Goebbels was the inventor of the propaganda technique which the Fasmunist left, the combination of fascists and communists that the likes of Turnbull represent, that they use. And this technique is to vilify and attack the reputation of anyone they regard as dangerous to their cause. And so those few of us, you and me and others like us, Alan, who have stood up and said, hang on a moment, the sums don't quite add up here, we have had vicious attacks on our reputation. That's not so much to get at us. The object of that particular propaganda exercise is to make sure that the thousands upon thousands who would otherwise be saying what we're saying are frightened and cowed and terrorized into a sort of craven silence. It's a way of frightening them.
Quite. And so now we've got this meeting in Paris. This is what all this is about. Meeting in Paris to sign up to a binding international treaty that will commit each nation to compliance with achieving the objectives set out in this ridiculous 1992 Rio Declaration. No public debate. No public debate. And you've said we should be withdrawing from all schemes linked to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, all this sustainable development government stuff, and the IPCC opinions have no credibility. They've been proven to be flawed, but it still goes on. It's biblical.
It goes on because this is the new presentation of fascism and communism. Remember that the vast majority of the population, unfortunately, doesn't realize what a fragile flower democracy is. They don't realize that the intention of the people who are behind this scare is to sweep democracy away forever. And you'll still have governments and you'll still have elections, but their powers will be less and less as the power and the wealth are transferred in huge amounts to this new centralized socialistic monster or communistic monster.
Sort of a world
what you like, but it's not pleasant.
I mean, Flannery here, our climate change commissioner, told us Sydney had run out of water. Now, surely that finishes the bloke off. I mean, at the end of the day, there are so many instances that prove the validity of what you have been saying.
Well, the fact is that every indicator shows that what we've been saying is correct. There has, as you said, been no global warming for nigh on 20 years. I mean, it's actually a completely flat trend for 18 years, 8 months, according to the satellites, and there's no statistically significant warming for 27 years. I mean, that's how long you have to go back before you can really be sure there's been any warming.
Look what it's costing. Look what it's costing the economy. I mean,
it's going to shut Australia down, of course. I mean, that's part of the aim in all this is to weaken the capitalist countries.
Well, look, before we go, let me just hear again
their own economies.
Lord Monckton, just before we go, just an abridged version, just what Lord Monckton said last year. Just listen to this again.
When Sir David King, William Hague's climate change ambassador for the United Kingdom, he was asked whether all the nations of the world were now in principle ready to sign their people's rights away in such a treaty. And he said, oh yes, but there are two standouts. One is Canada, and the other holdout was Australia. And Australia he can't do anything about because Tony Abbott is in office until after the December 2015 conference. So that means you all, first of all, need to guard Tony Abbott's back, because the Turnbull faction, in conjunction with the UN, will be doing their absolute level best to remove your elected Prime Minister from office before the end of his term, and in particular before December 2015. They do not want any standouts. So look after him.
There we are. Lord Monckton, we've got to go. It's lovely to talk to you. We keep the battle up, eh?
Well, thank you very much. One very quick parting shot, and that is what you need to argue for is a secession clause giving any country the right to give notice of a year and get out of the whole treaty-making process.
Well done. We'll keep talking. Thank you for your time.